The engine won't catch, and the pilot is already strapped in waiting for it to. One bad magneto today means he takes off in a plane that won't make it to the target at all. You are ground crew, Imperial Japanese Army Air Force, a airfield on Kyushu, April 1945. What you do in the next hour decides whether his last flight even leaves the ground. You've been awake since 3 in the morning, working by hooded lantern light, because American reconnaissance planes pass overhead before dawn and any light on the airstrip draws their attention. Your job isn't glamorous, and it never was. You're a mechanic, 19 years old, assigned to a unit that keeps aircraft flying for a Special Attack Corps. Special Attack, Tokatai, is the term command uses instead of saying what it actually means. Pilots who take off on missions from which return was never part of the plan. Today's aircraft is a Zero, stripped of half its usual weight so it can carry a 500-kilogram bomb fused to detonate on impact instead of dropping free. You've serviced dozens of planes like this one since February, watched dozens of pilots climb into cockpits and lift off toward Okinawa, where the American invasion fleet has been anchored offshore for weeks, absorbing wave after wave of attacks command calls Kikusui, floating chrysanthemums, because someone decided even mass suicide missions needed a poetic name. The pilot today is Ensign Tanaka. You've known him 3 weeks, which by this airfield standards makes you old friends. He's 20, from a fishing town on the coast, and he still writes letters home every night, even though everyone on this airfield knows what that means and doesn't say it out loud. This morning he helped you carry fuel cans without being asked, like a man trying to use up nervous energy any way he can find. The engine turns over, catches, then dies again. You climb onto the wing, sweat already soaking through your uniform despite the pre-dawn cold, and start tracing the ignition line by feel because there's no time to wait for better light. Somewhere behind you, ground crew are loading the bomb onto the rack beneath the fuselage, a job that requires absolute precision because a bomb rigged wrong can detonate on the runway and take half the airfield with it. You find the problem: a cracked spark plug, hairline, easy to miss unless you're looking for exactly that. You've got a spare in your kit, barely one spare, because supply convoys from the mainland factories have been getting hit by American bombers for months, and every part on this airfield is one of the last of its kind. You swap it out with hands that are shaking slightly, though you tell yourself it's the cold. The engine catches clean on the next try, and you feel relief you're immediately ashamed of, because a working engine on this particular airplane means only one thing for the man sitting in it. Command has scheduled today's launch for first light, time to slip past American radar coverage during the gap between night patrol and day patrol. A real vulnerability. American forces are still working to close this deep into the Okinawa campaign, and Japanese commanders have learned to read and exploit with what's left of their air strength. You have no way of knowing that this exact gap in radar coverage will be closed within the week, and that Tanaka's flight is one of the last that will ever slip through it clean. Ground crew wheel out a low table onto the tarmac, white cloth, small ceramic cups, a bottle of sake that's been rationed carefully because there are more pilots scheduled to fly this month than there is sake to send them off with. This ritual happens before every launch. Officers pour, pilots drink, sometimes a few words are said and sometimes nothing is, because by this point in the war, everyone standing on that tarmac has said this particular goodbye more times than they can count. You watch from beside the aircraft, wrench still in hand, as Tanaka accepts his cup and drinks it in one motion. He doesn't look afraid. You've decided by now that fear on this airfield doesn't disappear. It just gets folded up small enough that a 20-year-old can carry it onto a runway without anyone seeing it move. A younger mechanic beside you, barely 17, asks under his breath if you think it's really going to make a difference, one plane, one bomb, against an entire invasion fleet. You don't answer him. Not because you don't have an opinion, but because opinions aren't something ground crew are supposed to have out loud. Not on an airfield where officers are close enough to hear, and not about an order that's already been signed. Tanaka climbs into the cockpit. You do one final check. Control surfaces, fuel gauge. The bomb rack you didn't personally arm but need to visually confirm is seated correctly, because a mistake here isn't survivable for anyone standing near the aircraft when it happens. Everything reads correct. He looks down at you from the cockpit and says something you weren't expecting. Not a farewell, not anything dramatic. He asks you to make sure a letter reaches his mother, and hands it down folded into a small square, already addressed. You take it and put it inside your jacket without a word, because there isn't a word that fits this moment, and because you've done this exact thing for 3 other pilots already this month. Records from ground crew stationed at airfields like this one single out this stretch of the war, the final weeks before Okinawa's fall, as the period when launch schedules were tightest and turnaround time between pilots was shortest, because command was running out of both aircraft and volunteers at nearly the same rate. The engine roars to full power. You step back, hand raised, and Tanaka returns the gesture from the cockpit before releasing the brake and rolling forward down the strip. You watch the aircraft lift off, bank once toward the southeast, toward Okinawa and the fleet anchored there, and shrink into the gray morning sky until you can't tell it apart from the clouds anymore. You don't know yet whether he'll reach the fleet at all. Most taco sorties this late in the campaign are being intercepted by American fighter cover or shot down by picket destroyers stationed specifically to catch planes like his before they get close enough to matter. The rest of your morning doesn't stop for what just happened. There are 3 more aircraft scheduled to launch before noon, and each one needs the same checks, the same fuel, the same careful hands finding whatever's wrong before it becomes fatal in the air instead of survivable on the ground. You move to the next plane in line, a mechanic named Osugi already elbow-deep in its engine, swearing quietly at a fuel line that won't seat right. Midway through the second aircraft's check, an air raid siren cuts across the field. American carrier planes. Close enough that ground crew are already running for cover before the second wave of the alarm finishes sounding. You dive under the aircraft's wing, tools scattered, and watch a strafing run tear across the far end of the runway, cratering the strip your unit repaired only 2 days ago. Right now, on the other side of the world from anyone who will ever know your name, Ensign Tanaka's aircraft is somewhere over open water, and you have no way to know if he's still in the air or if the war already ended for him an hour ago. The strafing run passes. You crawl out from under the wing, ears ringing, and find that Osugi took shrapnel to the shoulder. Not fatal, but bad enough that he can't finish the check on his own. You take over his half of the work without being told to, hands moving faster now because the 3rd and 4th aircraft are still scheduled to launch on time regardless of what just happened to the runway or to Osugi's shoulder. By early afternoon, word starts filtering back through the airfield's radio room. Fragments, nothing official, the kind of information that travels between ground crew faster than any command briefing ever does. A flight was intercepted 20 minutes from the fleet. Some aircraft made it through. No names yet, no confirmation either way. Just static and rumor, and the particular silence of men who've learned not to ask questions they're not ready to hear answered. You keep working. There's nothing else to do with the not knowing except let it sit while your hands stay busy on an engine that has nothing to do with Tanaka at all. Confirmation doesn't come until evening, delivered the way it always is. Not by name, but by the number of aircraft that failed to report contact with the fleet before the mission window closed. 3 of 5 today. You do the math the way everyone on this airfield has learned to do it, fast and without letting yourself feel it too much while there's still work left before dark. You don't know which 3. You won't know for certain until the letters stop coming back requesting more fuel canisters, until someone from Tanaka's squadron mentions his name in a tone that answers the question without anyone having to ask it directly. That confirmation comes 2 days later, secondhand, in a conversation you overhear rather than one anyone has with you directly. Tanaka's aircraft never reported contact. Whether it was intercepted, went down from engine failure, or reached the fleet and simply left no confirmation behind, nobody on this airfield will ever know for certain, and nobody has the authority or the information to ever find out. You still have the letter inside your jacket. You add it to a small stack of others you've been carrying since February. Letters from pilots who trusted ground crew to send their last words home, because there was no other way to do it. No mail system built for men who weren't expected to need one. You'll find a way to mail them when the war allows it, if the war ever allows anything again. The airfield doesn't stop for grief. By the next morning, there are new pilots assigned to the aircraft you maintain, new names to learn quickly and not get too attached to, new engines that need checking before first light while American reconnaissance planes pass overhead in the dark. You keep doing the job. Not because you believe in what it's for anymore, if you ever fully did, but because the alternative is letting an engine fail on a runway full of teenagers who didn't build the war they're being sent to die in. And that failure is one you can still prevent, even when almost nothing else about this war is something you have any control over at all. You survived the war. Most of the pilots whose planes you serviced that spring did not, and the letters you carried home for them are some of the only proof, decades later, that the men who flew those final missions were more than the mission itself. If you had been standing on that airfield, would you have kept the engines running exactly as ordered, or found some quiet way to slow the work down, knowing either choice meant living with exactly how many young men left that runway because of hands like yours?